Let me just give you a few examples. These are examples where there's a very clear and direct connection between the two. That's not true for all of the students. In many cases, there's a less direct connection. But one of the graduates of the school, at the time that we studied him, was a machinist and an inventor. He was somebody who had engaged in lots of meticulous constructive play as a child. By the age of 10, he was making plasticine cities to scale models. Not because anybody was telling him to do this, he just was drawn to this. A little bit later, he was asking staff members to take him to the dump, and he would bring back bicycle parts, he and some of his friends, and then they would build bicycles from these parts and sell them for a few dollars. Later on, he was taking cars apart and putting them back together. And by the time he graduated, he was so skilled mechanically in his building things that he was already ready to become a machinist. But he became the kind of machinist that you would go to if you needed somebody to build a machine to solve some problem that nobody had already built a machine to do. Another of the, and when we interviewed him, he said, you know, I'm doing just what I used to do, but now I'm being paid for it, and also now it matters more. I have to be sure that it works. Another of the people we studied was the captain of a cruise ship at the time we did the study. She, as a little girl, loved boats. There was a pond on the school grounds, and she would play with boats on the pond. Later, she graduated to apprenticing herself. She didn't, even while she was a student, she made use of the off-campus policy of the school to be apprenticed to a ship captain on Cape Cod. By the time she graduated, she was pretty well prepared to go on to her dream job of being captain of a ship. Another student was, at the time that former student at the time we did the study, was a designer, a fashion designer in the high fashion industry, apparently a very sought after person. She, like a lot of little girls, played with dolls when she was a young student at the school. She then went to making clothes for the dolls. She began from there to make clothes for herself and her friends. By the time she graduated, she had a real understanding of fabrics and patterns. She was making original patterns, and then she apprenticed herself to a pattern maker and went on. Now notice, none of these went on to college. They all went on to their dream job without college. Let me give you one that did go to college. One of the people who, at that time, he was a college student. He was not sure. He was studying both piano and mathematics. He wasn't sure what he was going to go on to. He's now a professor of mathematics. He was a kid. The first question people ask when they hear about the school is, how does anybody ever get interested in mathematics? You know, most people don't in any great extent, and most people don't really need mathematics beyond the kind of mathematics that you use in everyday life. Or if you do need mathematics, you learn it at the time that you need it, which is always the best time to learn it because that is meaningful. Even most scientists I know say that the math they learned in school was totally useless to them. They had to learn the specialized kind of math that they use in relationship to the job that they're doing. And that it really didn't even help for them to have learned all the other math that they have long forgotten. So mathematics, but this kid was just purely interested in mathematics. To a real mathematician, math is play, it's fun. For him, it was play. And he's got interested in it through science fiction. He read all kinds of science fiction. He began to think of a good science fiction as one where you change one aspect from the real world. You have what you might call an axiom. Let's assume this is correct. Let's assume this is true even though it's not true in the real world. What would happen? And he sort of discovered that's kind of what mathematics is. Let's assume this is true and then let's carry it out and see all the implications of it. That kind of logical, deductive thinking captured him at even a young age and drew him into mathematics. There are many artists and musicians and computer programs. There are a lot of people who have founded their own company who are graduates of the school. The one thing I can say, the one area that seems to be deficient if you look at the graduates is there's not a lot of people who take the kinds of jobs where you just have to dutifully do what you're told to do. But fortunately, there are fewer and fewer of those jobs anyway in this world today. The employers are not crying out for people to work on assembly lines. They're crying out for people who can take initiative, who can be creative, who can learn on the job. And that seems to be the kind of skills that the graduates of this school have. Now I've probably gone over the time already, but I want you to look at the bottom of the page of the handout here, Part C, the optimal context for self-education. I'm going to be fairly quick here. Common to a hunter-gatherer band at Southern Valley School. I'm arguing these are the conditions. If we can set up these conditions, then we can just turn education over to children. But we as adults in our culture have the responsibility to set up these conditions if we want children to be able to educate themselves. And I would say to the degree that these conditions are present, the better children will be able to use their own educative instincts. Because these are the conditions that were present throughout human evolution, throughout hunter-gatherer times, apparently. The period of time in which our self-educative instincts evolved. So the first condition is the social expectation and reality that education is children's responsibility. Children come into the world believing it's their responsibility, and they will continue to believe it's their responsibility until we convince them that it's not. If we don't convince them that it's not, they will take responsibility. The human species would not have survived were not that true, because during most of evolution, most of human evolution, children to survive have had to learn the culture. You can't, as a human being, survive if you don't learn the culture. You don't learn at least enough of the culture. And during all that time, nobody was forcing children to learn it. Nobody was even encouraging them to learn it. The very fact that we have survived as a species means that children have to have evolved that drive. And you look at every little child, as I said at the beginning earlier on in this talk, and you can see that drive is present. So that's the first. We have to not take that drive away from them by pretending that we are responsible for their education. And the second point is unlimited freedom to play, explore, and pursue their own interests. It takes time to do this. You need lots of time to try different things. You need to be able to immerse yourself. You need time to get bored and time to overcome boredom. You need time to explore. You don't need just an hour a day of free play and exploration or 2 hours a day. You need lots of time. Whether it's all the time like a hunter-gatherer culture or at least half the time like the culture may have been in the 1950s when we were in school for a good share of the day, but we also had lots of time to act like hunter-gatherer kids. But you need lots of time for that. The third point is opportunity to play with the tools of the culture. Hunter-gatherers understand their kids need to play with knives and bows and arrows and fire and so on, dugout canoes, the tools of the culture. And the more you play with them, the more these things become extensions of your own body. They become natural. And the earlier you start playing with them, the more they become extensions and natural to your own body. And so they understand. They don't just give the kids toys. They allow the kids to play with the real tools of the culture. And that's true at Sudbury Valley too, but the tools are different. It's not so much knives and fire, although they certainly can play with those things as long as they follow certain rules about them. Can we save questions for just a bit? I'm getting very close to the end. What's the biggest tool in our culture today? The computer, of course. So of course children are drawn to computers, and of course they're drawn at a very young age, and of course they learn computers faster than adults do, because they at some gut level recognize that that's a critical tool of their culture. But they also play with many other tools in the culture: sporting equipment, cooking equipment, woodworking equipment, and so on, depending upon who they are. But for almost everybody, the computer is a tool, because computers have become a universal skill that everybody needs to know, and so it's not surprising that really all the kids play with computers. Only some of them play with the cooking equipment. Only some of them play with the woodworking equipment, and so on and so forth. Access to a variety of caring adults who are helpers, not judges. In a typical classroom, there's one teacher who you may or may not like, who may or may not be the kind of personality that you need, who may or may not know what you want to know. At a Sudbury school, there's a number of adults who have different personalities, different abilities. You go to them when you want help, And you feel free to go to them because they're not your judges. They're not grading you. They're not going to fail you. You don't have to put on any show to them. You can admit what you don't know. You can have a real honest conversation with them. You can go to them with your problems. They play the kind of adult role that an uncle or aunt might play. In a hunter-gatherer band, all the adults are people the children can go to in that mode. And they'll go to different adults for different purposes. At the school, there's one adult whose lap you might want to sit on if you need comforting. There's another adult who that's the last person you would go to for that. But maybe that's the first person you would go to if you're working on, if you're trying to think through some logical argument and you want to test it out with that person. So, and then most important perhaps, at least this is what I focus most on in my own research, is free age mixing among children and adolescents. Of course, in our typical schools, we segregate children by age. And I would argue that by doing that, you are depriving children of interacting with the very other children that they have the most to learn from. You're putting them with others who are at the same level. What do you have to learn from them? Little kids want to be like bigger kids. They want to be able to do the things that bigger kids do. At this school, little kids see bigger kids around them. The kids who can't read see older kids who know how to read and are enjoying reading, talking about books, reading to them. They then want to read. They want to join that club of older kids, just like they also want to learn to climb trees like the older kids can climb trees. And there's scaffolding that goes on in age-mixed play. So children, when they're playing together in an age-mixed way, those who are older and bigger and more capable are giving the younger ones boosts, whether they're physical boosts or intellectual boosts, that allow them to play in games that they wouldn't be able to do otherwise. Play at a more sophisticated level. This is what the great Russian developmental psychologist Lev Vygotsky referred to as playing in the zone of proximal development. You're engaged in activities that you are incapable of doing yourself, but you're capable of doing in interaction with people who are a little more competent than you. And essentially all the plays like that in the school. Little kids are interacting with older kids, and older kids, what are they learning in that? They're learning something really important. They're learning they can be leaders, they can be helpers, they can be nurturers. They're getting a sense of their own maturity. At 6 years old, you're the mature one in interacting with a 4-year-old. That's a really important thing to learn. You're not just a dependent, you're a helper. You're somebody who's capable of being helpful to another person. So age mixing works both ways. It's at least as valuable for the older one in the group as for the younger one in the group. There's also a lot of research that shows that the presence of little kids tends to bring out the nurturing instinct in teenagers. It's almost like there's a drive to learn how to be a parent. You see these little kids and that drive to, teenagers love little kids. They love to carry them around, roughhouse with them, read to them, so on and so forth. What are they doing? I think in some sense they're practicing being parents. They're naturally drawn to them. And the little kids, of course, benefit tremendously from this interaction with these cool older kids. And the final point I want to make here is immersion in a stable, moral, democratic community. That was not my initial list, but the more I thought about it, the more I thought that's really also an important part of it. A hunter-gatherer band is sort of the original democracy. It works differently from our democracy because it's a smaller scale. You can do things by consensus rather than vote. But it's a democracy. Everybody decides together on what to do. People are relatively equal. There's relative equality among individuals. And there's this group decision making. And it's clearly a moral society and a stable society. You're growing up in this band. You're going to be with these people for a while. And there are clear rules about what you can do and can't do. They may not be written rules, they may not even be verbally stated, but they're social norms that are well accepted. There are certain things that are taboo that you would never do. And you're growing up then incorporating the sense of what's right and wrong, and you're growing up with a sense of responsibility not just for yourself, but the community within which you're growing. Sudbury Valley School is the same thing in many ways. You're not there just for a year, you're there for a period of time. These are going to be your colleagues, not just for 1 year. These are going to be your friends. Some of them every year. It's always sad. Some of them graduate and leave the school. There's always new ones coming in. But you might be with these people, with some of these people for several years, maybe even as many as 12 years. And these are people that you're learning are part of your community. You learn to value your community. You're making rules about the community. You're not defacing the community. You're not littering and so on and so forth because you value this. You're learning how to value the place that you are living. So my argument is that the reason Sudbury Valley School works, most people are so surprised that it would work. My argument is that the reason it works is that it replicates for our time and our culture the essential conditions of a hunter-gatherer band were present throughout most of human evolution, that were present when children evolved all these drives for learning. And if we want to make use of these drives for learning, we need to create environments which have these characteristics. I don't think that the people who started off developing Sudbury Valley School had a hunter-gatherer culture in mind. They had in mind principles of American democracy. But I don't think it's a coincidence that when you look back at it, when you look at it now, you see the features that they came up with are features that represent what was present during hunter-gatherer times. And with that, first of all, I apologize for probably going on longer than I should have gone on, and anybody who has to leave, feel free to leave. But let me stop at this point and thank you very much for your kind attention.